Thank you for joining today's webinar on Secure Choice, an update on state-facilitated retirement savings. My name is Hank Kim, and I'm the Executive Director and Counsel for the National Conference on Public Employee Retirement Systems. Today's program is part of our Center for Online Learning, which provides remote continuing education to public pension trustees, staff, and other fiduciaries and stakeholders. In today's webinar, we will review the current status of state-facilitated retirement savings programs, popularly known as Secure Choice. Areas covered include updates on states that have enacted legislation, types of programs, legal and regulatory hurdles, and future outlook for these programs. Our presenter today is Angela Antonelli, Executive Director of the Center for Retirement Initiatives at Georgetown University. We encourage audience participation. However, please submit your questions by going to the GoToMeetings portal. To ensure that we can cover all your topics, we will hold your questions till the last part of the program. Angela, the webinar is yours.
Thanks, Hank. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to join you this afternoon, and thanks to Hank and to NCPERS for hosting this webinar, and also for the support, the leadership, and the commitment that Hank and the group at NCPERS has provided, not just to the Georgetown Center, but again, the key role that NCPERS has played in a commitment to strengthening retirement security for millions of American workers who've been left behind. The Georgetown Center focuses on the private sector workforce that currently lacks access to ways to save. And again, the support of NCPERS and many other organizations has been instrumental to the work that we've been able to do, and hopefully the contributions that we've made to this. And I'm really, really happy to be part of this webinar and with you today to share what I think has been incredibly exciting progress that's been made. I think to some extent, I'd like to think that we might be at a tipping point when it comes to strengthening retirement security in this country. For 40 years, the needle really has not moved in any significant way with respect to the private sector workforce and the percentage of workers in the private sector who really have not had a way to save through an employer-sponsored retirement savings plan. And through these state initiatives, which I'll be describing and walking you through today, I really do think that we are at a point, because of state leadership, because of state innovation, that we are seeing attention focused on this issue in a way that hopefully will make, bring us to this tipping point where we can see significant progress being made, and that in the not too distant future, hopefully we won't be talking about it's been 40 years and half of the workforce not having access to ways to save, and a much larger proportion of our population saving and being better prepared for aging and a life in retirement. So again, it's an exciting time. So why are states acting today? States are acting today. You know, the private sector serves employers and individuals and providing retirement savings plans. But the reality is they're businesses, and they have products to sell and ways to help people save. But, you know, from a policymaker's perspective, it's a little bit different. Policymakers have to worry about the reality of their citizens and their residents, and how much income they have. Do they have good jobs? How's the economy? And for our aging population, as they age, are they going to have sufficient income in retirement? Because if they don't have sufficient income in retirement, there are consequences to that. And it has an impact on federal, state, and local budgets and programs and the economic strength of our economy. So policymakers, out of necessity, are focused on these issues for good reason. Again, there are significant budget and economic consequences of insufficient retirement income. What are we seeing happening? There are trends today that require us to have strategic foresight. We see these things coming down the pike, and policymakers need to be thinking now about what needs to be done now so that we're better prepared 20 or 30 years from now as a nation to have a strong economy, to have a population that's living a good quality of life, a good standard of living. We have a rapidly aging population that is living longer. For folks today that are 65, they're expected to live into their mid-80s. For those of you who might be listening who have kids, if you're 10 years old today, your life expectancy is somewhere between 103 and 104 years old. For kids in college today that are 20 years old, they're expected to live at least to be 100 years old. So again, globally, in the United States and globally, we have longer lifespans and a rapidly aging population. Where a significant portion of our population, 10,000 Americans today, every day, are retiring and turning age 65. And again, our population is going to be living longer. So the challenge that we face is if we work 30 or 40 years and yet subtract out the first 20 years of your life, where maybe you're obviously being raised by your parents, you're going to college, you live to be 100, that's 80 years on your own. 40 years you work. So how are you going to work for 40 years and then save to live essentially for 80 years? How does that math work? And certainly if folks are not saving today, it makes it much more challenging. So the aging population, we have that compounded, the problem compounded by the lack of retirement readiness. The reality is, for those who do not have an easy way to save, they don't save. An employer-provided plan, people are 15 times more likely to save through an employer-sponsored plan. The numbers today are quite startling. For those age 55 to 64 years old households today, more than half of them, about 55%, have less than $25,000 in savings. And 41% of those households age 55 to 64 have zero saved. And so they're essentially going to have to rely significantly on Social Security in their retirement. If you look at the data today, people say, well, the people who are currently retired, generally the median income they have is about $50,000 a year to live on. Well, if they need about $40,000 to $50,000 a year to live on, and maybe Social Security will provide about $16,000 of that, that means you need to find about another $28,000 in annual income to support yourself in retirement. And in terms of overall retirement savings and defined contribution savings, that's somewhere over about $300,000 to $400,000 in retirement savings that you need to have. And the reality is that given the numbers that I just mentioned about those age 55 to 64 years old, most are not even close to having that kind of money put away for retirement. So the fact that folks are having a hard time saving for retirement, even those who do have access to workplace plans are not saving enough, that lack of retirement readiness financially is a real challenge and problem that we face. In addition, with the aging of the population, with the difficulties of saving for retirement and the challenges of doing that, many more are going into retirement carrying significant amounts of debt, and they're carrying it longer. So they're carrying it well into their 70s and 80s. Health, where people say, well, maybe it's just work a little bit longer and that will help do it, work in retirement to help supplement. The reality is there are challenges to that. There are a number of different reasons why it may not be as easy as one thinks to work longer in retirement. One of the challenges could be health issues, and health issues can easily take away one's ability to continue working into their 70s or in their 80s. So again, it's a challenge that we face. How are we going to be able to, with an aging population that lacks retirement readiness, that doesn't have an easy way to save for retirement today, half of that private sector workforce, the challenges that we face if we're going to live to be 100, how can we afford that, working 40 years? And again, that's assuming one's lucky to work 40 years continuously and be able to save throughout those 40 years to support 80 years of life. So again, serious budget and economic challenges. And what that means is increasing pressure on state budgets and programs. The state of Pennsylvania recently, as part of their task force looking at these challenges, commissioned an economic study. And it looked at what the consequences were going to be for the state of a large population of retirees with insufficient retirement income. And just in the state of Pennsylvania, as an example, the estimates are upwards of $1 billion over the next 15 years in additional costs to the state by having more elderly residents who lack sufficient retirement income. The state assistance costs in the state of Pennsylvania for its elderly residents was already $4.2 billion in 2015. And again, given that $4 billion that's already just the state level costs, as the population ages, retires, it's growing older in Pennsylvania as it is around the country, there's going to be increasing pressures for additional resources. And the projections are that, where it's $4.2 billion today, it could be upwards in the next 15 years of $5 to $6 billion. And also, to the extent that you have retirees retiring with insufficient income, obviously, there's lost household spending. They don't have enough income to go out and spend and to do the things that perhaps they'd like to do. And the consequence of that is, in Pennsylvania, estimated somewhere upwards of by 2030. So again, less than 15 years from now, more than $3 billion in lost household spending. What does that mean? That means money that is not going into the state economy. It means that jobs are not being created. So the estimate of the economic modeling showed about 20,000 full-time jobs lost. There are other studies that have shown that for every 100 retirees that move into a community that have sufficient retirement income and can spend, you're creating about 55 new jobs. For every 100 retirees, 55 new jobs. Conversely, if you have retirees that do not have sufficient income and cannot spend, you lose jobs, and jobs can't be created. And again, on top of the problem just becomes a spiral because you have lost tax revenue, because you don't have the income. People are not able to put that money back into the economy. And it's increasingly also a challenge where there's lost tax revenue, the ability, given the aging of the population, where you have increasingly fewer and fewer younger workers having to support an aging population, and it becomes more and more challenging. So again, the significant consequences and pressures on the state budgets and programs will be significant, and there will be a significant impact on economic growth. Again, if we have an increasingly, we know it's an aging population, but if it's going to be an aging and poor population, there's going to be significant consequences. And that's why states are acting. Policymakers understand this, and it's their responsibility to be worried about this. And so with that, we see the leadership from the states. For innovation and leadership, look to the states. The states are truly driving change. And quite honestly, I will talk more about in this presentation about what the states are doing, but they are really driving change by being innovative. And I think it is shining a light on the issues and the challenges that we face. It is putting, quite honestly, with that spotlight, the private sector, recognizing where there have been shortcomings, and the private sector needs to do more and to do better. And quite honestly, I think without the leadership of the states, I'm not sure that pressure and that pressure to really do more and do better would be as strong. And also the attention that I think we see in the media and elsewhere, but also in the advertising from those who provide retirement services, to understand that there's a challenge that we face and it needs to be addressed. And so what the states are doing is really leading the way, and it's having an impact. And it's not just what the states are doing, but overall it spills over, and it's having a much broader impact on the retirement security debate, focusing attention on the nature of the problem and getting the private sector to do more and to do better. And the goal here is really, what states are doing is to design simple, low cost, and easily accessible and effective savings options for the private sector workforce that does not have a way to save through employer-sponsored plans today. And the goal ultimately is to expand access, coverage, and improve long-term outcomes. And I'll talk more about that. So this map shows you, as of 2017, so we've gone through the state legislative sessions in 2017, that we had more than 40 states considering or enacting private sector retirement initiatives since 2012. But to be clear, really in just the past 3 years, we've seen significant levels of state activity and many new programs that have been enacted. And even as you look at this map and you see the states that are blue, which are the states that have been without activity, in 2018, an additional 3 of those states that you see as blue would actually be green. So as of 2018, we are getting close to almost all 50 states in the past few years having considered or enacted private sector retirement initiatives. So there's an increasing recognition, clearly, pretty much nationwide across almost all states, that this is something that they need to be taking a look at. And not surprisingly, it does take some time. A state may look at a proposed legislative initiative in a given year, and it may take some time. It may take a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, to educate and build momentum and build support to take action. But the reality is, at this point, most states have recognized that this is something worthy of attention and potential action. So where are we? The news is we have 10 states and 1 city that have enacted programs. So almost 50 states, upwards of about 43 to 45 states, have been contemplating actions over the past few years. And the output of that, subtract from that, you've got 11 that have new programs. 10 of them are states, 1 is the city of Seattle. So when we think about that, and most of this enactment of these programs has been since 2015, when we think about that, it's 20% of the states in about 3 years that have enacted new programs, which I think is tremendous progress that's been made. So when you look at it, the 10 states and the 1 city, as outlined here on this slide, you have the mandatory auto IRA programs that are listed there: California, Connecticut, Illinois, Maryland, Oregon, and Seattle. And then on the right side, you have the other models, 3 other models: the multiple employer plans, MAPs, in Vermont, Massachusetts; marketplaces, which are online portals for IRAs and 401ks. The programs are in Washington and New Jersey. And we expect very soon to have finalized a voluntary payroll deduction IRA in the state of New York. It passed the legislature just in the past week, and it's pending the governor's signature. So this is quite significant and something to be very excited about. There are 4 different models that you see in front of you. The reality is, again, states are innovative. They're showing leadership. In the 4 different models, I think it's something to be excited about, because we will see through the implementation of these different models, we're going to learn a tremendous amount about what works well and what maybe doesn't work so well. On the one hand, you have the mandatory auto IRA programs. On the right side, on these other 3 models, they're voluntary participation on the part of employers. Now, in all cases, participation on the part of employees is voluntary. Even with the mandatory auto IRAs, they're mandatory for the employers to offer their employees access. Employees can be auto-enrolled, but can choose to opt out. So again, the difference here: different models: IRAs, 401ks, marketplaces, mandatory, voluntary participation on the part of employers. So it'll be really interesting for us to see over time what's going to work best, and on different levels. So for example, the use of auto-enrollment and opt-out as a tool for facilitating and encouraging savings, the education and the marketing that's done by these programs, the mandate versus a voluntary approach in terms of uptake into these programs and how they can get to scale. So there'll be a lot of things that we're going to learn through these different programs. All of them, I refer to these programs as public-private partnerships, because they truly are. The states are partnering with the private sector, contracting with private sector vendors to provide the products that are being offered to employers and employees. And I think, as a result of this, the private sector, I think, increasingly has begun to see the opportunities that are here, because the private sector, because of these state initiatives, are also going to be learning about what works well and benefit from that and help them do a better job in terms of what they offer every day in the marketplace to employers in terms of retirement savings options. So again, it's very exciting to see these different models and the innovation and the leadership of the states. And again, this will benefit our nation overall, both public and private sector, because we're going to learn a tremendous amount about how to do this even better. What are the tools that really work? And hopefully, obviously, most importantly, at the end of the day, we're going to succeed in expanding access and expanding coverage and having more workers saved. And we're just going to get better at it. Now, one of the things that has been a question that folks may have heard about with respect to the state initiatives are action that was recently taken in Congress and by the administration with respect to these state programs. So there have been questions about, given actions recently taken, if it did something to the state programs. The reality is the state programs, as you can see, are continuing to move forward. States had wanted some clarity, particularly the mandatory auto IRA programs, on whether they would be subject to ERISA or not. DOL had finalized a safe harbor in 2016 outlining the conditions under which state mandatory auto IRAs would not be subject to ERISA. Congress repealed that safe harbor using the Congressional Review Act in the spring of 2017, about a year ago. But the states and Seattle, which post repeal of the safe harbor still enacted a mandatory auto IRA, have chosen to move forward with the advice of legal counsel to implement, or again, in the case of Seattle, enact their auto IRA programs. And the legal argument made by the states, and again, they're to be applauded for continuing to move forward with their state programs, is that these auto IRA programs should, like regular IRAs, just not be subject to ERISA. There's a 40-year-old original safe harbor that's been around for payroll deduction IRAs, and basically, a legal determination that even with the use of auto enrollment and the state mandates for employers to provide their employees access to the state program and a way to save, that it really shouldn't change the interpretation of the original safe harbor, and that these programs really still fall outside of ERISA. At this point, there's been no litigation to date challenging whether or not programs are subject to ERISA. And we do have one of the programs, as I will get to, that has launched. There was a small lawsuit in the state of Oregon. It wasn't fundamentally challenging whether the program was covered by ERISA or not. It was simply making the point that those employers who already offer plans shouldn't have to take on what really is a minimal reporting requirement to basically say that they are already providing plans to their employees. That has been settled. And again, this was brought by the ERIC industry group, but they have been clear to say that while they were concerned about the reporting burden on employers who already have plans, that they strongly support the state programs and what they are accomplishing. So again, no litigation to date, and that small issue in Oregon has now been settled. So states are forging ahead. Since May of 2017 and the repeal of the safe harbor, 3 new programs have been enacted. Vermont enacted a multiple employer plan in the summer of 2017. This was post CRA action, the Congressional Review Act action. Seattle passed a mandatory auto IRA program in November of 2017. And New York is poised to, with the governor's signature, enact a voluntary payroll deduction IRA. And since 2017, last year, again, there was legislative action in 22 states and cities. Again, not to be confused with the bigger picture of overall state action over the past few years. In some years, states they take action, and other states they don't. They introduce proposals. And in 2018, there legislative action in 15 states and cities so far, and others are still possible because legislative sessions are still ongoing. But one of the interesting things is that the legislative model that we still see predominantly being considered by the states is the mandatory auto IRA approach. And I think that's an important point to take note of, given the actions taken a year ago with respect to the safe harbor. So what's happening in the mandatory auto IRA states, which are some of the first states to have enacted programs and moving towards implementation. They're making tremendous progress. And between now and about 2020, we'll see several of these programs, if not all 6 of them, be close, either have launched, and many of them probably will have launched by 2020, just 2.5 to 3 years from now, or be very close to it. In Oregon, Oregon is open for business. The program launched. It has a phased rollout that they're doing now through May of 2020. But even though they're bringing the employers on in waves, it's currently open to any employer in the state that wants to start using the program. California, again, anticipates its pilots later this year. Statewide enrollment beginning in 2019, phased in over 3 years through January of 2022. And again, similar to Oregon, they plan to allow people to come in at any time, even though they will take a phased approach. Illinois, again, 2018, a pilot, followed by later phases, with enrollment to be completed by the end of 2020. So these states, as I described this, they're in different stages of implementation. Their boards continuing to work out their implementation timelines and phases. Connecticut the board recently set a January 2019, which is an ambitious target date for beginning a phased rollout, but again, a phased rollout could be over more than 1 or 2 years. Maryland, their board is appointed. They're in the process of staffing, figuring out the budgeting. And Seattle is, being the newest program, in the process of appointing their board, which should be in place in the next few months. And then they have to do a market and financial feasibility study. So again, this is all exciting progress on the part of the states to move forward and implement these programs. In Oregon Saves, this just gives you a quick view of their timeline. Again, the waves of how they will be bringing employers on. Bottom line here is with respect to Oregon is there's about 87,000 employers and about 600,000 or so eligible employees. And again, although this is phased through 2020, employers now, if they want to, if they're scheduled in wave 5 but want to join the program now, they can. And you can go to the Oregon Saves website. I just put these screenshots up for you to see what it looks like. They've done amazing work. They have their main page. They have a Savers portal and an employer portal that are user-friendly, that guide people through the program. The progress in Oregon Saves, again, Oregon Saves is open for business, and it's the first state program to have launched. Their pilot phase was very successful in 2017, where they had 42 employers and over 2,000 employees entering into the program, and 11 employers and 156 employers in the first pilot, and then additional 42 and 2,000 employees in the second. They're gone through wave 1 with employers with more than 100 employees. That closed in November 2017. They're in their second wave now, again, going back to this timeline and the phasing in of the waves. And for the overall program to date, about 492 employers have registered to facilitate the program with their employees, including 263 that have joined early. The important thing to keep in mind is I mentioned the overall number of eligible employers. So obviously it's still very early stage. They've got to roll out all these waves through 2020. But what's exciting is on average, employees are contributing about $100 a month. The contribution rate is averaging about 4.69%. And the assets in the program in just a couple of months, with just a tiny proportion of employers in the program so far, is over 2 million. And it's growing rapidly. We watch the ticker every month significantly climb. So you can imagine as more and more they move through these waves and all of the employers that will participate in this program, what those dollars and assets under management are going to grow to over time. And pretty much consistent with the research and what we've seen in other countries and programs, 80% of the eligible employees are choosing to stay when they're auto-enrolled. Only about 20% are opting out. And again, in the month of March alone, the number of funded saver accounts rose by 20% and the assets rose by over 50%. So again, we're going to see significant acceleration over time as more and more employers and the waves of this program continue to be implemented. So it's very exciting. But again, workers are wanting to save, and they are saving on average about 5%. Small business support in Oregon is significant, and I would highly recommend, if you're interested in looking at the Oregon Saves program, they have a YouTube channel where they have a lot of great videos from small businesses that are excited about the program and participating, and it really benefits them. Again, they think it's very easy to use. Oregon Saves is a great tool for a small business owner. It helps us recruit solid workers and helps us retain solid workers. And it's very easy to use, and it's one paycheck at a time to make those, to start saving. So again, a lot of small business support when you talk to individual small businesses about the program, as opposed to perhaps organizations that represent them that might have a different perspective. And my experience has been talking with small businesses around the country that they're very excited about this and see it as a great tool and a great help. Just a quick overview of program implementation steps that get taken by states. Obviously, they appoint their boards, they begin to meet, they look at hiring consultants to help them design the requirements necessary for program administrators and investment managers for the program, the record keepers, the investment products that are going to be offered through the programs, and then program launch. What's important to note is I have an arrow for marketing and outreach that cuts across the bottom, and I'd have to say probably the most important thing about all of these programs that's important to really do from beginning to end, and then throughout the life of the program, is marketing and outreach. It's really getting the message out that the program is available and what the advantages of the program are, and helping workers understand that they do have these options available and how easy it is for them to begin to save. And then when they do start saving, helping them understand how quickly their savings accumulates and what it can mean for them in terms of their retirement. So again, the states have been really taking the time to go out and have listening sessions, to meet with small businesses, to meet with workers around their states, and to hear what they are saying and get that feedback as they're sharing what their programs are all about and what the goals and objectives are, and how they're trying to help, again, expand that access to ways to save for workers in their states. So some of the implementation learning curve adjustments that we're seeing. Interestingly enough, increases in default contribution rates and the use of auto escalation. So I think when a lot of these original laws were being contemplated and proposals are contemplated, there was a tendency to sort of start at the 3%. The reality is a lot of those feasibility studies that have been done and analysis and focus groups with workers have shown that they're comfortable with higher default contribution levels. Actually, it could go as high as 5 or 6%. And so states have been doing that. And we see with Oregon that, in fact, the default contribution, the level that they're at, is just about 5%. And that's great news. Again, that higher default contribution rate means putting a little bit more, even more away for savings. So we're seeing the states, as they're implementing their programs, going through the process of increasing that default contribution level to upwards of 5%. And in some cases with auto escalation also built in, as you can see in Oregon and California. The fees for these programs, again, they're meant to be low cost. And so there's really a focus on making sure that those costs remain low. In Oregon, the administrative fees are capped at about 1%. In Washington State, in the marketplace, employers cannot be charged any costs at all. And the final rules allow for de minimis fees that can be charged. In the case of the Washington State marketplace, for the IRAs and the 401ks that are being offered in those states, the range of costs in the case of the IRAs is somewhere about 0.14 up to 0.9%. So under 1%, and in some cases can be extremely low. You're looking at 14 to 90 basis points. And for the 401ks, about 44 to 96. So again, keeping that under 1%, and ideally, what we'll see over time is that they're going to be at that lower end of that fee range. And in Illinois, as an example, again, with amendments to the law, really making clear that total fees all in has to stay at 75 basis points and cannot exceed that. Interestingly enough, in terms of account structures, more programs are using Roth IRAs. And there are aspects of Roth IRAs that can be more helpful to those at lower income range. One of the aspects, again, with Roth IRAs versus traditional IRAs is some flexibility with respect to withdrawals that are allowed without it being taxed. And, again, Roth IRAs versus traditional IRAs, if you're at a lower tax rate now, better to pay the tax now, perhaps, than to be paying that upon withdrawal. So there are some elements of Roth IRAs that, based on analysis with respect to those who are at the lower income, can provide advantages and attractiveness in terms of the account structure. And then, how are these programs going to be paid for? So there's a lot of, discussion. Is this, these state programs, how are they paying for it? What's the budget? How much are they spending? And the reality is, again, I've referred to these as public-private partnerships, and they truly are. Why? Because, there are some startup costs for the states, but they are negotiating through the use of multi-year contracts with the program administrators and with other vendors to bear as much of to have those vendors bear the startup costs of the program, which would hopefully be repaid over the terms of the contract. So again, these are true public-private partnerships where the states kind of create the framework and set up a structure, but then contract out the services to outside vendors. And I talked about the 6 states, which are the mandatory auto IRAs. So for the other models that have been moving at this point, the marketplaces and the MEPs, just a quick update. So Washington, the retirement marketplace. So Oregon is open for business. Washington State is open for business. Washington State is a retirement marketplace. It just launched 3 weeks ago. It's the nation's first online portal, which allows businesses and individuals to comparison shop for low-cost state-verified savings plans. And again, they have IRAs and 401ks in there. New Jersey has a red because it's really slow progress. They passed the law a couple of years ago, but really hadn't done anything, only more recently issued an RFI asking for information about how the marketplace could work. So not a lot of progress in New Jersey. That may change as the environment in New Jersey has changed. And so we'll have to see. With respect to multiple employer plans in Vermont, Massachusetts, Vermont is yellow because it's in the planning stages, but they expect to have the program up and running by January of 2019. They're going to be putting out and looking, they're working with a consultant now. They'll get their RFP out for a program administrator. And the Massachusetts 401k map is really targeted right now specifically to small nonprofits with 20 or fewer employees, but it is open. It is open for business. The Washington State Retirement Marketplace, again, if you want to look at it, it's very easy for you to go in there. They certainly welcome feedback, but you can go in there and move around there if you wanted to look at the types of plans that are available, both the IRAs and the Roths. 5 types of 401ks are offered by Saturn Trust, 2 IRAs, Roth and traditional, offered by FinHabits in the Washington State Marketplace, and they anticipate more plans being added in the future. So what's the outlook for 2018 for these initiatives? Again, several states are going to make progress. I've walked through that with you. Illinois, California, Vermont, Connecticut, these other states will continue to move forward. Seattle, again, is going to be doing its studies and beginning to work on the implementation of its program. I think some of the questions, have we seen everything yet with respect to Congress and the administration? And could there be some action taken to discourage state initiatives? We will have to see. We will have to see, but right now, again, with respect to the legal challenge and the applicability of ERISA to the mandatory auto IRA programs, the states are moving forward. They believe they're on solid legal ground to do so. What we might see with states is we have more and more states and we see regions. So Oregon, Washington State, California on the West Coast. On the East Coast, we have Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Vermont in close proximity. Are there ways that states can begin to collaborate in new and interesting ways to achieve scale and keep costs low and expand coverage? And that's something that a lot of smart people are continuing to give thought to. And then we hopefully will see one or more new state programs enacted. Actually, New York is one. So the question is, in addition to New York, will we see another state? we have some interesting activity at the state level, and we could see another program in at least one other state. And again, I think what's also very encouraging is private sector innovation in response to the state efforts. I mean, it's this private sector. I was at a meeting recently, and someone representing, the defined contribution sector basically said, look, for a long time we've said that we've got this, just leave it to the private sector. But we now recognize that there's a sector of the private sector workforce that we've just not been successful in reaching for a long time. And that there's some value in these initiatives that are being done. And that's great to hear. The private sector should really see the opportunities that states are offering through these public-private partnerships rather than see it as a threat. And quite honestly, I think we are seeing that shift in understanding that this really does represent a tremendous opportunity for the private sector, both to learn from what the state programs are doing, as I mentioned earlier, and so that they can do more and do better, but also really the opportunities that these state initiatives provide, because again, essentially the states are contracting the work out to the providers, to vendors to handle. And then again, I think, the positive on more focus on issues that impact retirement readiness and long-term well-being. So we're talking about contingent workforce and the gig economy, which is another challenge that we face. And the state initiatives are looking at ways to address the independent contractors, the sole proprietors, and make sure that they have easier ways to save as well. Issues of financial well-being and better understanding that, the challenges of, families and emergency needs, and how you can design these programs so that you are recognizing the realities of family budgets and challenges, but at the same time still have the ability to save for retirement. And that includes recognizing issues around debt, where we see discussions around student loan debt, housing debt, and other things that are burdens, financial burdens on families today. Investment performance, and then lifetime income, because at the end of the day, why are you saving? You're not saving for saving's sake, but you're saving to support you throughout your lifetime. And so it's not just focusing on the accumulation, but also the decumulation component of the spectrum, and how are we going to devise mechanisms and solutions that allow to help individuals and families more effectively manage their income in retirement and have it last a lifetime. So again, if you want to know more about Oregon Saves and Washington State, you can hear it directly from the people who are running these programs. We're going to be hosting a webinar on April 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You're welcome to register. The link is here on this deck. I believe NCPERS will make that available to you. You can also go to our website at cri.georgetown.edu and register for it. And we'll have State Treasurer Tobias Reed, along with the team from Oregon and a small business in Oregon, and then the folks from Washington State. So again, thank you very much. This is our website. And again, thank you very much, Hank and NCPERS.
Great. Thank you, Angela. So before we end the session, we have a number of questions for you. First is, in the Oregon program, what percentage of employers have been able to opt out? And how has this compared to expectations?
I don't have the numbers on, well, I mean, employers in the state of Oregon, again, there's a mandate for employers to offer a program. So I think perhaps what the question might be getting at is, of those who didn't have a retirement program in place, are they going to go into the state program, or did they choose to go get something in the private sector? I don't have those numbers. However, what I will say, and what I do know, is that where there are employers that have come in as part of the wave and the phase-in, some employers have in fact chosen to go into the private sector workforce and get a plan on their own, rather than go into the state program. That's a small number. I don't know the exact numbers to tell you how that has broken out so far. But again, there are folks, as I pointed out, that are joining early and moving into the state program. But yes, I mean, and the states have always readily said this is a mandate that employers offer their employees a way to save. They can either choose to do that through the state program, or they can choose to go get a plan in the private sector. And the state is fine with that. The key is that they're offering something. And if they're not going to go out and do it on their own, then to facilitate it through the state.
Another question is, in your opinion, what are the pluses and minuses of the various plan designs?
I think that's a good question. I think we still have a lot to learn about that. But, I think probably the biggest thing that we have to see is with a mandatory approach, a mandate that employers are required to offer their employees access to a way to save. Obviously, in terms of uptake and participation, we would expect that to perhaps be more significant than in a voluntary environment. I think what we have to see is really for those voluntary options, and again, there are now 3 of them. So we have the marketplaces, which are voluntary participation, the MEPs, the multiple employer plan approach, the 401ks that are ERISA plans, and a voluntary payroll deduction, which we're anticipating in New York State. So I think we're really, one of the probably biggest things we're going to see is in a mandatory versus voluntary approach, what's that going to mean ultimately for participation and uptake in terms of increased coverage and savings over time. Other than the mandatory voluntary issue and how that has an impact, I think the other, again, people get into ERISA coverage versus non-ERISA sort of consumer protection issues with the different models. If it's outside of ERISA as opposed to covered by ERISA, which, for example, again, a MEP is an ERISA plan, the auto IRAs are not covered by ERISA. ERISA, obviously, there are advantages in terms of consumer protections that are built in. However, the states that are outside of ERISA, I think, have been doing a very good job in terms of being very aware of the importance of the consumer protections that are embodied in ERISA, and through the context of their own rulemaking, putting those kinds of protections in place. So there is that regulatory distinction. Then again, one other distinction is IRAs versus 401ks. So depending on the accounts that you're looking at, obviously 401ks, you have the ability to save more, higher levels of contribution, both by the employee. You have the ability of the employer match that exists there as well. So, I mean, the things that we know in terms of differences between IRAs and 401ks, again, there are differences there, and advantages and disadvantages. But again, I think at the end of the day, given what we know about how people save and how much they save, I think what we need to see is overall participation. And when you have a mandate that's in place versus a voluntary program, and really what ultimately that means for us in terms of expanding coverage and savings overall.
There's another question, Angela, and it's relative, I guess, to Oregon, or actually those plans that are going with the Roth plan design. So with Roth being the most common structure, is there any concern about the future in 20 to 30 years when withdrawals are not taxed? How does this solve the budget concerns brought up earlier?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of projecting out in terms of if they're not paying taxes on that when they withdraw it down the road. I haven't done any kind of analysis, looked at crunching numbers and trying to do some kind of economic projection of what that means and the tax implications of it 20 or 30 years from now, and what that means. But certainly, hopefully, to the extent that there is a promise made now with respect to the taxability, they're paying taxes now, and when they take it out, it's not supposed to be taxed. That those agreements remain in place and the ground hasn't shifted. I mean, that's always an unknown with respect to tax policy. I think that's probably the bigger concern from an individual perspective, is understanding that you're paying taxes now with the understanding that you're not going to be paying taxes later with a Roth, and hopefully that does not change.
Well, and also I would think that in terms of budget, it's budget not necessarily as relative to revenue taken in 20, 30 years down the road, but expenditures in, say, social safety net programs that may be ameliorated because of these state facilitated programs.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. To the extent that you have folks that are putting this money away now, and again, the potential here, we have a lot of small businesses, we have a lot of young workers. This is a way to get them to save. And, even some of the anecdotal stories of, young workers who are putting that $50 or $100 a month away and looking back in just a couple months and, seeing how money begins to accumulate and liking what that feels like, and really beginning them on hopefully essentially changing the trajectory of their lives by showing the positives of the savings and saving early and what that can mean over the course of their working life. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the savings and the building of that potential income down the road, with the Roth IRAs, I think part of it also is, yes, again, what the private sector in terms of opportunity should understand too is that you have a lot of these workers, and they may be in these, they're starting out with the IRAs. For some of them, again, it's a starting point, and they're going to move on, and they'll be in employer provided programs and be able to have other vehicles and ways to save as well. It's a starting point that will build over their lifetime. But again, sometimes there's a tendency to perhaps think that, is it really worthwhile to put $50, what we're seeing in Oregon, $100 a month away? And the answer is absolutely yes. And to start doing that, because over time it's going to accumulate, it will come up, and it will be a significant amount of money. And again, later in their lives, the ability to, Pew recently did a study about what these IRAs can mean for, delaying Social Security, taking Social Security. But what does that mean? That means if you don't have to take it at age 62 and you can wait to take your Social Security benefits for a few more years, you're going to get that 8% increase every year that you can delay taking Social Security. And it also means, potentially not having to rely on other government programs. So again, from a policymaker's perspective, you've got people saving money to take care of themselves in retirement, and to some degree, perhaps relieve some of that growing pressure on federal, state, and local budgets.
Great. So I have one final question for you, which is, how would you define success for these state initiatives?
I think for these state initiatives, success is going to be defined by a number of different metrics. I think these are metrics that are important overall. Are we expanding access to coverage? Are we in fact seeing more people covered? Are we seeing more people saving and saving more over time? And in the long run, and I think this is something that's still to evolve, is are we able to develop ways that are parts of these programs, but also part of what we see in the private sector that is not in the defined contribution world, is the notion of lifetime income. And are we able to help those who are saving but then enter into retirement, be able to manage their money to last a lifetime? So it's sort of one of the great things about a defined benefit plan is the ability to have that guaranteed income upon retirement, and that monthly payment that you get. So how in the defined contribution world can we make defined contribution plans look and feel more like defined benefit plans and all of the things that we know about defined benefit plans that strengthen retirement security. So, I think the challenge we have is we've moved away from a defined benefit world to a defined contribution world. And that has left the pillars of the stool broken, right? Social Security, a pension plan, and then savings. These defined contribution plans were always meant to be not the primary, but a supplemental savings. So now that we've realized that we've sort of broken this contract, broken this stool of retirement security, how do we begin to change that and move that closer back to that original promise? And how, at the end of the day, do we take these defined contribution ways of saving and make them, and again, how do we make them feel and bring to the table those things that were more like traditional defined benefit plans? And I think that's going to be the measure of success over time. We're not there yet. We haven't figured it all out. There's a lot of important work that's being done. But again, I think these state initiatives are putting those questions out there. They're forcing the public and private sector to think about how to do this and to do it better and to try to answer some of these questions. And I think, the long-term success of the state initiatives will be not just whether it's the state initiatives, but as a nation, have we in fact strengthened retirement security, put back the stool with those three components to it, and most importantly, really strengthen retirement security, which is not just the savings, but that lifetime income.
Great. Thank you, Angela. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. At the conclusion of this webinar, there will be 3 short survey questions that we ask you to answer. And the next NCPERS webinar will be on June 12th on corporate governance. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to hosting you again on June 12th. Bye-bye.